Do you even know who you're talking to? The words cracked through the midnight air before Officer Naomi Carter could finish her first sentence, sharp and polished like they had been used for years to make waiters shrink, clerks apologize, and strangers step aside. Red and blue light rolled across the black sedan in slow waves, turning the judge's windshield into a sheet of trembling color, while traffic hissed past on the wet highway in long silver lines. Naomi stood beside the driver's door with the calm posture she had trained into her bones over 6 years on the force, one hand near her body camera, the other resting low and open at her side. She had made hundreds of stops like this on lonely Georgia roads just after midnight, when the air smelled faintly of rain and gasoline, and people became more honest than they ever intended to be. But the man behind the wheel was not interested in honesty. Judge Harold Whitmore lowered the glass the rest of the way and stared at her as if the badge on her chest were a costume he found insulting. His white dress shirt was open at the collar, his silk tie loosened, his silver cuff link catching the patrol lights every time he moved his hand. Everything about him looked expensive, practiced, untouchable. "License and registration, sir," Naomi said, her voice level, professional, almost quiet enough to disappear into the sweep of tires on asphalt. Whitmore gave a dry laugh, the kind that carried no humor at all. "You people really think a badge makes you equal." The sentence landed between them like something old and poisonous. For one brief second, the world seemed to narrow to the sound of her own breathing and the flashing red on the wet shoulder. Naomi had heard many versions of that sentence before. Not always with those exact words, not always spoken out loud, but always there. In the pause when someone saw her skin before her rank. In the delayed respect. In the surprise when she spoke with precision. In the way certain men looked at her uniform and still searched for someone else in charge. She did not blink. She did not step back. Behind Whitmore's car, another driver slowed, then stopped several yards away. Headlights washed over the roadside grass. A phone lifted behind a windshield. Naomi noticed it without turning her head. Whitmore noticed it too, and somehow that made him sit taller, as if an audience had finally arrived. "I am Judge Harold Whitmore," he said, drawing out each word with the confidence of a man accustomed to courtrooms rising when he entered. "You are making a serious mistake." Naomi leaned down slightly, enough to catch the smell drifting from the car. Oak, cologne, leather, and beneath it, unmistakable whiskey. Not overpowering. Just present. Present enough. Her gaze moved once, brief and careful, over the edge of the front bumper. Something dark glistened near the lower panel. A scrape. Fresh. Her radio murmured softly on her shoulder, dispatch traffic blending into the night. She straightened, the rain-cool wind brushing against her cheek, and looked directly at the man who believed the law bent around his name. "Then help me understand, sir," she said. "Why your car matches the description from a hit-and-run reported 6 minutes ago." Whitmore did not answer right away. The confidence in his face did not disappear, but it shifted, like a polished surface catching a crack underneath. For a man who had spent decades controlling courtrooms with a lifted eyebrow and a measured pause, silence was usually a weapon. Tonight it looked more like calculation. He glanced once at the rearview mirror, once at the shoulder ahead, as if distance itself might offer him an escape that dignity could not. "That is absurd," he said at last, his tone lower now, though not softer. "You are reaching because you pulled over the wrong person, and now you need a reason to justify it." Naomi kept her eyes on him, steady and unreadable. The passing cars sent ribbons of white light across the judge's cheekbones, then swallowed them again into darkness. Behind them, the driver who had stopped remained in place, phone still raised, a small glowing rectangle floating in the night like a witness that had no stake in either reputation or rank. Naomi touched the radio clipped near her shoulder. "Dispatch, confirm vehicle description on the incident at mile marker 82. Static breathed for half a second. Then the answer came back, clear enough to cut through the wind. "Black Mercedes sedan, partial plate matches, front end damage reported by caller, last seen heading southbound." Whitmore's jaw tightened. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Naomi saw it because her job had taught her to notice the movements people wished they could hide. The same lesson had followed her through precinct hallways, courthouse security lines, and every room where respect arrived late because of the color of her skin. Men like Whitmore always believed control was something they owned by nature. They wore it in their tailored jackets, in their expensive watches, in their certainty that the world would interpret their anger as authority and hers as attitude. Naomi had learned something different. Real control was quiet. Real control was breathing evenly while a man tried to reduce you with a sentence. Real control was hearing the insult, feeling its sting, and choosing not to hand him the reaction he wanted. "Sir," she said, every word clean and measured. "Keep your hands where I can see them and remain in the vehicle." He turned toward her fully then, the old arrogance rushing back as if fear had offended him. "Do you understand who you are speaking to? I sign orders that shape this county. I know the sheriff. I know your chief. By morning, you could be working a desk in a basement somewhere wishing you had listened." Naomi did not move. A drop of rain struck her sleeve, then another, soft at first, almost delicate. The clouds above had been gathering for miles. She looked past Whitmore's shoulder toward the passenger seat, where a leather folio lay partly open with embossed initials on the flap. She noticed the thick, white envelope tucked beneath it, the gala parking tag hanging from the mirror, the half-full bottle of sparkling water in the cup holder, everything curated to suggest a respectable evening with respectable people. But respectability was not innocence, and polished men often made the worst assumptions. Her flashlight angled downward for a moment, tracing the scrape near the front bumper. Red paint. Fresh enough to shine. "Step by step, this is how this goes," Naomi said. "You provide your license and registration. I verify your condition. I document what I see. And if this vehicle is connected to that call, the facts will decide what happens next." Whitmore stared at her, and for the first time since she had approached the car, he seemed to realize she was not standing there alone with his version of the story. The body camera was recording. The highway camera half a mile back might have caught his. Lane change. The stranger behind them was still filming. Dispatch had heard everything. The law he had used like a private language all his life was no longer abstract. It was here now in the damp midnight air, in her badge, in her posture, in the simple impossible truth that she was not afraid of him. Slowly, very slowly, Judge Harold Whitmore reached for his wallet. The leather wallet looked almost theatrical in Whitmore's hand, dark and expensive, the kind of object meant to be noticed when it appeared. He opened it with a controlled motion and held it out just enough for Naomi to see the license and the judicial identification behind it, as if the documents themselves might end the stop on sight. The patrol lights washed over the gold seal, then over his face, then over Naomi's badge, turning all three into brief flashes of authority that did not mean the same thing tonight. She took the license, read the name, read the address, and handed it back without changing her expression. "Thank you, Judge Whitmore," she said. The title sat in her voice without fear and without deference, just a fact placed where a fact belonged. That seemed to bother him more than if she had challenged him directly. Some people could not bear to lose power quietly. He passed over the registration a second later, slower this time, his fingers lingering on the paper as though he still expected the world to remember its place. Naomi stepped back from the door and angled her flashlight once more across the front of the sedan. The scrape near the bumper was clearer now, a crescent of red paint against black metal, fresh enough that rain had not yet dulled it. Her radio gave a soft burst of static, then dispatch returned. "Officer Carter, the reporting party from the collision is now on scene with county deputies 2 miles north. Caller describes the striking vehicle as a late-model black Mercedes with front bumper damage and partial Georgia tag Victor Charlie 7. Naomi looked at the plate again. It matched. The highway suddenly felt smaller, as though every lane, every mile marker, every passing headlight had been leading to this exact shoulder. Rain began to fall in earnest, light but steady, stippling the hood of the patrol unit and darkening the pavement until it shone like black glass. Behind the Mercedes, the bystander was still recording. Naomi could see the faint white reflection of a phone screen through the mist. Whitmore followed her glance and drew in a breath that sounded too measured to be natural. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "Someone brushed a fender somewhere, and now you are building a public spectacle because you want to feel important." Naomi let the words pass without landing. She had spent too many years learning that some insults were invitations, bait dressed up as judgment. He wanted her angry. He wanted her voice to rise so his own would sound reasonable by comparison. He wanted the old arrangement back, where a powerful white man could decide what counted as truth simply because he said it first. But the night had already moved beyond that. Evidence had a way of stripping drama down to its bones. "Sir," she said, "have you had anything to drink this evening?" His eyes hardened. "At a charitable dinner, I had 1 glass of bourbon, which is perfectly legal for an adult man." Naomi noticed how carefully he chose the word one, how quickly he answered, how the scent from the car told a more complicated story than his pride allowed. She glanced toward the passenger seat again. The folded gala program bore the logo of the Whitmore Foundation. Elegant script, gold border, a room full of donors, judges, attorneys, and cameras, all of them likely still thinking Harold Whitmore had left with his dignity intact. Out here, dignity was being measured by very different instruments. Her body camera kept blinking. The rain kept falling. Dispatch kept listening. And somewhere up the road, someone whose night had been interrupted by a damaged car and a frightened heartbeat was waiting to find out whether the man responsible would be treated like everyone else or not. Naomi lifted her chin slightly and met his stare. "Please step out of the vehicle, sir." For the first time that night, Harold Whitmore did not move. Rain tapped against the roof of the Mercedes in a soft, steady rhythm, and the red and blue patrol lights kept sliding over his face, over the polished wood on the dashboard, over the silver ring on his hand as it tightened around the steering wheel. He looked less like a man being asked to step out of a car and more like a man being asked to step out of a version of himself he had trusted for too long. "I do not think you understand the consequences of what you are doing," he said, each word clipped and deliberate, as though he were already rehearsing the version of events he would give to someone more powerful than she was supposed to be. Naomi Carter stood in the rain without shifting her weight. Water gathered along the edge of her duty belt and darkened the shoulders of her uniform, but her posture remained exact, calm, and immovable. She had learned early in her career that authority was not volume, and it was not theater. Authority was clarity under pressure. Authority was following procedure when the person in front of you had spent a lifetime assuming procedure could be bent by the right last name, the right donation, the right phone call made to the right friend before sunrise. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," she repeated, her voice level enough to make his anger sound loud by comparison. Behind them, the waiting car remained on the shoulder, engine running, headlights fixed on the scene. The person inside was still filming. That small rectangle of light had become its own kind of presence now, silent and patient, proof that the night no longer belonged only to the story Whitmore might have told afterward. He released the wheel at last, but not because he had accepted her authority. Naomi could see that immediately. He moved with the controlled irritation of a man performing compliance for witnesses, preserving his dignity one gesture at a time. He opened the door and stepped out carefully onto the wet shoulder. Expensive dress, shoes meeting rain-dark pavement that reflected the lights like broken glass. Up close, the scent of bourbon was clearer in the cold air. Not overwhelming, not dramatic, but real. His jaw was set hard enough to show the strain beneath it. "This is harassment," he said. "This is what happens when undertrained officers are given too much room to improvise." Naomi let the insult pass without answering it. The highway sighed beside them. 18-wheelers and sedans rushing through the dark as if another world still existed beyond this narrow strip of wet asphalt. Her flashlight moved briefly over the front bumper again, then to the driver's side panel, where the fresh scrape caught. The beam in a thin bright line. Red paint. No question now. Dispatch crackled once more through her shoulder radio, informing her that county units had made contact with the driver from the earlier collision and that the witness described the vehicle's driver as an older white male in formal evening clothes. Whitmore heard every word. Something changed in his face then, not an admission, not yet, but the first unmistakable tremor of a man realizing that facts were gathering faster than influence. Naomi gave him the next instruction in the same calm tone, watching his hands, his breathing, the rain collecting along the collar of his shirt. "Sir, I am going to conduct field sobriety procedures based on the totality of what I have observed." He stared at her as if the sentence itself were an offense too large to process. Then he laughed once, short and hollow. "You are really going to do this to a sitting judge?" Naomi met his eyes, rain cooling her skin, body camera blinking, the truth standing between them with nowhere left to go. "No, sir," she said. "I am doing this for the law." The rain kept falling, fine and cold, turning the shoulder of the highway into a mirror of broken light. Harold Whitmore stood beside his car with his hands rigid at his sides, the wet fabric of his shirt beginning to cling at the collar, the shine of certainty fading from him one hard breath at a time. Officer Naomi Carter explained each step with measured precision, her voice low, clear, and untouched by the tension he kept trying to force into the air between them. She did not rush. She did not dramatize. She did what trained officers were taught to do when the truth mattered more than the ego standing in front of them. Whitmore, however, seemed unable to understand a world in which the process applied to him. He gave short answers, then longer ones, then answers that contradicted what he had said only moments before. He complained about the rain. He complained about the lights. He complained about the humiliation of being observed by strangers on the side of the road, as if humiliation were a thing that only became real when it touched someone important. Naomi listened without reacting. She had heard this pattern before, though rarely in such polished language. First came dismissal, then insult, then the assumption that procedure was somehow personal when it stopped serving privilege. A county deputy arrived and parked several yards behind her cruiser, rain misting across the beam of his headlights. The bystander who had been filming remained in place, patient and still, while somewhere farther up the road the driver from the earlier collision was waiting with a damaged car and a story that no longer sounded uncertain. Naomi guided Whitmore through the next set of instructions. His posture was stiff, his face pale beneath the wash of patrol lights, and every few seconds his eyes darted toward the deputy's vehicle, toward the phone recording from behind the windshield, toward the endless stream of cars passing by without slowing. It was as if he had suddenly become aware that reputation could not be argued with asphalt, rain, camera footage, and radio logs. "This is unbelievable," he muttered, not to Naomi now, but to the night itself, to the humiliating fact of being held inside a process he had so often overseen from above. "Do you know what this will look like?" Naomi looked at him fully, rain beating on her lashes, her body camera blinking in steady intervals. "It will look like an officer doing her job, sir." That answer seemed to strike deeper than any accusation could have. For the first time, he had no immediate reply. The deputy stepped closer after receiving an update through his own radio. The witness vehicle from the earlier collision had identified the Mercedes by the damage pattern and partial plate. More information was coming in from traffic cameras near the exit ramp. The net was no longer tightening. It had already closed. Whitmore swallowed and turned his face away, but there was nowhere to turn except the wet, dark shoulder and the sound of passing tires. Naomi could feel the moment shifting now, the exact point where anger gave way to fear. Not dramatic fear, not loud fear, the quieter kind, the colder kind, when a person begins to understand that title, race, money, and old assumptions will not stop what comes next. She took one breath, then another, and made her decision with the same discipline she had carried since the start of the stop. "Judge Whitmore," she said, every word steady and formal. "Based on the evidence available at this time, you are being detained pending further investigation into the collision and suspected impaired driving." For a second, he just stared at her, rain threading down the side of his face, disbelief widening in his eyes as though the law had suddenly become a stranger wearing her voice. After the words left Naomi Carter's mouth, the highway seemed to exhale. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough for the night to change shape around them. Harold Whitmore did not argue immediately this time. He stood in the rain with the stunned stillness of a man who had always believed consequences were things that happened to other people, people without invitations, without titles, without the invisible cushion of old influence beneath every mistake. The county deputy remained a respectful distance away, radio murmuring softly at his shoulder, while water gathered along the hood of the patrol cars and rolled down in silver lines. The bystander behind them was still recording, but even that no longer felt intrusive. It felt inevitable. Naomi watched Whitmore carefully, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the measured attention of someone who understood that the most revealing moments were often the quietest ones. The shouting was over. The threats had thinned out. What remained was a colder truth, one that sat plainly in the damp air between them. For the first time all night, Whitmore looked smaller than his reputation. Rain darkened his white shirt, softened the sharp edges of his expensive suit jacket, and flattened the careful architecture of a man who had built himself out of prestige and assumption. He turned his face toward the road, and the red and blue reflections moved over his skin like borrowed colors that no longer belonged to him. Somewhere in the distance, a truck horn carried low across the interstate. Naomi could smell rain, wet pavement, gasoline, and the faint trace of bourbon still clinging to the space around him. It was strange, she thought, how truth often arrived not like thunder, but like weather, gradual and impossible to negotiate with once it settled in. She had known nights like this before, though not with a judge and not under a camera lens that would likely carry the footage much farther than this county line by morning. She knew the feeling of being tested in public. She knew the burden of staying composed while someone tried to turn your dignity into a performance. She knew what it cost to remain professional when another person mistook your calm for weakness and your restraint for fear. Years earlier, her father had told her something she never forgot while polishing his shoes before church on a summer Sunday. He had said that some people would spend their whole lives confusing kindness with surrender because they had never learned the difference between gentleness and power. Standing there now in the rain, Naomi understood exactly what he had meant. Whitmore finally spoke, but when he did, the force had drained from his voice. "This will ruin everything," he said, more to himself than to her. Naomi did not answer right away. Water slid from the brim of her patrol cap. Her body camera kept blinking. The deputy waited. Dispatch waited. The witness up the road waited. The law, for once, was not hurrying to make room for a powerful man's discomfort. "No, sir," she said at last, her tone quiet enough that he had to listen carefully. "What ruins a life is believing the rules are beneath you." Whitmore lowered his eyes then, not in humility yet, but in the first raw shadow of recognition. And in that long, rain-soaked silence, with patrol lights painting the pavement and every easy excuse washed clean away, the night stopped being about a traffic stop and became about something much larger, something he could finally feel and no longer outrun. The next update came not from Harold Whitmore, but from the deputy's radio. Traffic camera footage from the exit ramp had been pulled, and the timestamp locked everything into place with the cold precision of a courtroom clock. A black Mercedes had drifted wide, clipped another vehicle, paused for less than 2 seconds, then accelerated south without stopping. The plate was not fully visible on the first angle, but the second camera caught enough to erase any remaining doubt. The deputy listened, nodded once, and looked toward Naomi Carter with the kind of professional restraint that meant the facts had just become heavier. Naomi did not let that show on her face. She stood in the rain with the same steady posture, the same quiet command she had held from the beginning, but inside she felt the moment settle with absolute clarity. This was no longer a matter of suspicion leaning towards certainty. It was certainty arriving on record. Whitmore heard it too. She could see it in the way his shoulders lowered, not in surrender, not yet, but in the involuntary collapse of a man whose confidence had always depended on there being just enough uncertainty to manipulate. The bystander behind them finally stepped out of the car, umbrella half open, phone still in hand, and called out that the video from the beginning of the stop had been saved. Not just the stop itself, but Whitmore's words, his threats, the contempt in his voice when he looked at Naomi's badge and still saw someone beneath him. The deputy took down the witness information while Naomi remained where she was, letting the process unfold in the order it needed to unfold. She had learned long ago that truth became stronger when no one rushed it. Whitmore turned toward the witness, then toward the deputy, and finally back to Naomi, as if searching every face for one crack, one ally, one old reflex of deference that might still rescue him. He found none. The rain had slicked his hair back against his forehead now, and the expensive confidence he had worn at the start of the stop was gone, replaced by something far more revealing. Not rage. Not even humiliation, exactly. Recognition. Slow, reluctant, and unmistakable. "You are going to let this become a circus," he said, but the line had lost its force. It sounded tired, almost confused, like he could not understand why the machinery he had trusted all his life was no longer moving in his favor. Naomi looked at him for a long second before answering. The patrol lights painted red over the wet shoulder, then blue, then red again, and every flash seemed to strip another layer off the myth he had carried into the night. "No, sir," she said. "You made that choice the moment you thought the law would stop for your title and not for the person you hit." He flinched at the sentence, not physically, but somewhere deeper, somewhere pride met memory. And in that fragile space, Naomi saw the truth reach him at last. He was not standing above the law. He was standing inside it, just like everyone else he had ever judged. The deputy stepped closer with the final confirmation from dispatch, and Whitmore closed his eyes for one brief second, as if the darkness behind them might offer mercy. When he opened them again, he did not look at the cameras, or the witness, or the highway. He looked only at Naomi Carter, the black officer he had dismissed on sight, and for the first time that night, he understood exactly who was standing in front of him. The formal steps that followed were quiet, almost painfully so. Harold Whitmore stood beneath the rain and the patrol lights while Naomi Carter explained the process in the same calm tone she had used from the beginning, never raising her voice, never adding a word that did not belong. The county deputy remained beside them as witness and support, but the center of the moment stayed fixed on Naomi, on the officer Whitmore had dismissed as if her badge were decorative and her authority conditional. Now every condition had fallen away. The witness video had been preserved. The traffic camera footage had been logged. Dispatch had confirmed the plate, the damage, the timeline, and the report from the other driver. The road had given up its truth piece by piece, and none of it could be argued back into silence. Whitmore looked at the wet pavement for a long time before he finally spoke. When he did, his voice no longer carried the steel of command. It carried the thin, strained weight of a man hearing himself for the first time. "Officer Carter," he said, and even that was different now. No edge, no mockery, just the title he should have used from the start. Naomi waited. Rain traced down the brim of her cap and along the sleeve of her uniform. Her body camera still blinked in patient intervals, recording not triumph, not revenge, but the simple shape of accountability. "I misjudged you," Whitmore said. The words seemed to cost him something. "No," Naomi answered, her voice low and steady. "You judged me exactly the way you wanted to." He closed his eyes at that, only for a moment, but it was enough. Enough for the truth to settle deeper than procedure, deeper than embarrassment, into the place where a person meets the wreckage of what they believed about themselves. The deputy moved carefully through the required steps while Naomi remained composed, giving clear instructions, allowing Whitmore the dignity of order even after he had tried to strip it from her. That was the part he seemed least prepared for. Not the evidence, not the witness, not even the legal consequences beginning to form around him like the rain. It was her restraint that unsettled him most. She did not humiliate him. She did not answer insult with insult. She did not use the moment to settle anything except the facts. On some level, Naomi knew he would remember that longer than the cameras. "I am sorry," he said at last, and this time there was no performance left in it. The highway roared beside them, indifferent and endless, while the red and blue light kept moving over the scene like a pulse. Naomi looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a monster, not a symbol, but a man whose power had hidden his character from himself for too long. Forgiveness was not the same as forgetting, and mercy was not the same as erasing consequences. She understood both. "Then let this be the first honest thing you do tonight," she said. Whitmore gave a faint, broken nod. The deputy led him toward the cruiser with professional care, and Naomi turned briefly toward the witness down the shoulder, thanking them for staying and for telling the truth. The witness lowered the phone and nodded back, as if everyone present understood that something more than one roadside stop had just happened here. In the cold rain, under the glare of government lights and the gaze of strangers, a man who had spent years believing himself untouchable had finally been forced to stand inside the same law he had expected others to fear alone. And Naomi Carter, without cruelty, without spectacle, without ever surrendering her calm, had made him face it. Dawn arrived without ceremony. By the time Officer Naomi Carter pulled back into the precinct lot, the rain had thinned to a silver mist, and the sky over the pine line had begun to pale from charcoal to blue-gray. The long night still clung to everything, to the wet hood of her cruiser, to the cuffs of her uniform, to the faint ache behind her eyes that came from too many hours spent standing straight while the world tried to lean on her. She turned off the engine and sat in the sudden quiet, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, listening to the ticking metal cool beneath the hood. No one rushed her. No. One knocked on the window. The radio had finally gone still. For the first time since the lights had flashed behind Harold Whitmore's car, there was nothing demanding her voice, her attention, or her restraint. Through the windshield, the lot shimmered with leftover rain, and the American flag near the front entrance stirred once in the light morning wind, then settled again. Naomi reached up and unclipped her body camera. The little device came free with a soft click, impossibly small for something that had carried the weight of an entire night. She looked at it in her hand for a moment, at the dark lens that had seen everything exactly as it happened, without fear, without favor, without the old habit of looking away when power made itself ugly. Inside the building, she could already imagine the fluorescent lights, the paperwork, the calls from supervisors, the careful language of reports that would soon become evidence, headlines, questions from people who had not stood on that wet shoulder and felt what it meant when a man like Harold Whitmore realized the law had not been built for his comfort after all. She did not smile. She did not need to. Some victories arrived too quietly for smiling. They settled instead into the chest like a deep breath finally taken after being held too long. Her phone vibrated once in the cup holder, then again, messages beginning to gather from coworkers, from people who had heard fragments over dispatch, from names she did not yet want to read. She left the phone where it was. The noise could wait. The opinions could wait. The internet, if the video had already begun to move, could wait too. Naomi opened the door and stepped out into the cool morning air. The world smelled washed clean, wet asphalt, pine, distant coffee from the station break room, and that clear empty scent that comes just after rain when even a parking lot can feel briefly holy. She walked a few steps, then stopped beside the cruiser and looked at her reflection in the side window. Uniform pressed though damp, shoulders tired but squared, badge catching the first thin ribbon of sunrise. She thought about her father again, about polished shoes on a Sunday morning, about the lesson he had given her years before in a kitchen filled with weak sunlight and the smell of starch. And Oldham books. Kindness was not weakness. It never had been. Restraint was not surrender. Dignity was not silence. And justice, when it was real, did not have to shout. Inside a holding room a few miles away, Harold Whitmore was beginning a very different morning, one without deference, without shortcuts, without the shelter of being instantly believed. Naomi did not need to picture his face to know that. She only needed to remember the moment he finally looked at her and truly saw her, not as a target for contempt, not as a role he could shrink with a sentence, but as an officer whose calm had outlasted his cruelty. That was enough. She closed the cruiser door gently and headed toward the station entrance as the sun finally broke over the lot, laying gold across the wet pavement in long, quiet bands. No speech followed her. No applause waited on the other side of the glass. Just the soft hum of the building waking up and the steady sound of her own footsteps carrying her forward, while behind her the last of the storm water slipped from the roof of the cruiser and disappeared into the light.